And in all fairness, I've had 21 years as a principal. I understand that courage and vision are probably two of the most important traits one brings to leadership. And I can see that he probably lacks that courage.
You became a coach to help people, but no one told you how to build the business behind it. Welcome to Coach as Entrepreneur, the show of for coaches building real businesses with systems, strategy, and heart. Build the system, serve your clients, support your family. Today's guest is Phil Roberts, a seasoned educator, consultant, and ICF accredited coach with over 30 years in school leadership. A former principal turned trusted advisor, Phil specializes in conflict resolution, strategic leadership, and cultural transformation. He's been a driving force in Australia's independent and Jewish education sectors and brings a deep commitment to mentoring leaders and building thriving school cultures. Phil, thank you so much for joining us today from Australia. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you.
Great to be here, David. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Why don't we kind of get into what you're doing right now with your coaching and what kind of coaching you're doing in particular?
Yeah, sure. Look, I'm really targeting more than anything educational leaders, although leadership from organisations, but because of my background, targeting more educational leaders. And that involves anyone who may be in middle management or higher, and also working in the capacity of a consultant to schools where the coaching becomes particularly relevant and important in that capacity. So, apart from the few private clients, it's also the coaching of many people as I consult to schools. You find that you
Mhm.
just happen to draw on that skill quite naturally anyway.
Right. And as you're coaching right now, where do you feel like your focus is on most of the time?
Mm, that's a great question. First of all, there's quite a focus I have on the strategic level,
Hmm.
particularly when I'm working in schools with leaders. I'm really about, as your introduction said, helping to transform the schools, maybe taking poor performing schools and making them perform particularly well. So that requires a particular holistic approach to strategy, but
Mm,
also looking at the individuals. The best leaders tend to be the most self actualized leaders. And
mm,
my experience to date tells me that many of those leaders need support at an individual level. So it's not just about the strategic, but also about looking at the individual I'm working with. And to that extent, I might use DISC assessments where I'm certified to use, and EQ
mm,
assessments. And that reveals a lot about the particular leader I'm working with and gives me the opportunity then to drill down on their personalities
mhm.
and drill down more on who they are as leaders.
Right. It's interesting because that is definitely something as I've started having more of these conversations, is coming out is that you go in and you start working with somebody because there's a particular area in the business or in the school that they need help with, but then very quickly it goes from just that one particular functional area to them as a leader holistically because you can't just coach somebody like half of somebody. If you're going to coach them, you have to coach the whole person.
And that's a great summary. Just to give some colour to this, as an individual I have in Melbourne,
Hmm.
and this particular person, he's really drowning. And, what he's revealed to me about his personal side to his life, and I'm not a psychologist, I will
Hmm.
emphasize that, but it has been very important to understand the impact that's having on his potential to lead well. So,
Mm,
yes, as you describe, it needs to be holistic. We can't just keep focusing on the strategic when you've
mm.
got an individual like this who is clearly floundering.
Right. If you're okay to kind of talk a little bit more about this individual, what were you brought in to work with him on originally?
Yeah, well, that's a great question because originally it really was a request by another principal overseas to work with this school and to come in and do some coaching with the leadership. And on the very first session, this person opened up very honestly, and I really admire him and really enjoy working with him because he's been so honest about the lack of balance in his life, how he devotes all his time to his work, how he doesn't see enough of his wife, he feels
Mm,
deficient as a father. There was a lot of
mm,
honest, open conversation that has
mm,
taken place, and I'm really trying to get him to work with me on that, trying to ensure that the school has good sustainable leadership
mm,
because he is currently, albeit temporarily, he is currently the person in charge.
mhm.
But as I said, he's floundering.
In this situation, what are the kind of things that you're doing to help him to deal with his situation?
Mm. Well, one of the things we did is a disc assessment with him, and it reveals a lot about who he is. Very altruistic person,
Mm,
sacrifices he all about the sacrifice that he makes for others. Also trying to drill down on the values that he brings to any task. What are his
mm,
fundamental values as a
mhm,
guiding rudder? How are they going to guide him in the actions that he takes? And trying to get him to understand that he will be a better leader if he's able to reach a greater balance in his life, looking at the leisure activities that he should be undertaking and devoting a little bit more time to his own study, to his own interests. So it's
mhm,
really about trying to get him to have a more balanced life and not be so sacrificial to his job,
mm,
uh, and at the same time, looking at those personal characteristics around how he deals with stress, how he deals with conflict,
mm.
how he's managing the team.
I
He
see.
doesn't seem to be managing the team particularly well because I don't say this disrespectfully, but he probably lacks the courage at
Mm,
times to make the decisions that are really necessary. And in all fairness, I've had 21 years as a principal. I understand that courage and vision are probably two of the most important traits one brings to leadership. And I can
right.
see that he probably lacks that courage. So
Mm,
helping him to find the courage to make those decisions, it's quite multifaceted.
yeah. Yeah, so you're definitely not working on just a functional area of a job. It's really working on the whole person and helping them through some really important things. When you're put into a position of power or authority and you're very altruistic, I feel that there's a tendency to pour as much as possible into that work to the detriment of your one's own health or to to even the time you spend with your family, as you were saying before. I mean, you can only the thing I was thinking about as you were speaking was, if you have a cup and you want to keep pouring into other people's lives, you need to refill your cup. And if you're not spending that time doing like leisure or activities, spending time with your family, doing like focusing on your own self-interest, you keep pouring yourself out, but you're not filling yourself back up, and then eventually you're depleted, and then what do we have? We just have another person who's burned out of, a profession, and we are left wanting for somebody else to replace them.
Yeah, yeah. It's a great metaphor, and you are right. And I must say, it really is an enormous privilege. Even when I was principal, it was an enormous privilege to have people come into the office, close the door, and
Mm,
disclose. Um, that was probably one of the most enjoyable aspects of the job, which is why I enjoy coaching because I'm in a very privileged position to work with wonderful people who need support.
yeah.
And today, it's not easy being in education. I know that.
Mhm.
And it's not easy being a leader, particularly when you're dealing with a multitude of issues that you deal with on a day-to-day basis. So yeah,
Right.
it's a good observation, David.
Talking about your experience as a principal and then going into coaching, where was that like transformation of I'm coming to this point where my career is I'm transitioning out of my career as a principal and I go into coaching. How did that happen for you?
Yeah, it's another good question. In some ways, it was by design. I
Mm,
knew that I had 2 or 3 years left in me, but I knew I enjoyed working enormously and I didn't want to just sever work completely.
mhm,
So, probably 3 years prior to leaving, I did the necessary training to become a coach. And that, in the last 3 years of my leadership, was enormously beneficial anyway. I only wish I would have done it earlier. And that allowed for the transition in a much
mhm,
easier process to move out of what I was doing. But to be honest with you, I've leveraged off contacts and the fact that I was in the position I was in and that I'm
mhm,
at the age I'm at. It's been enormously beneficial having that advantage. I can't imagine what it would be like to try to be in a position of a coach were it not for the fact that I've had, in some ways, if I say it myself, an illustrious career, a
mm,
lot of a lot of contact with a lot of people, well known in the independent sector in Australia, in New South
right.
Wales. So I was leveraging off a lot, and that's
Mm,
been honestly beneficial.
right. Can we talk a little bit more and explore that a little bit? How did you leverage off of your connections, your network, your work experience as you started your coaching business?
Mm. Well, when I left my role as a principal, I did do a lot of marketing at the time,
Mhm,
and I was marketing specifically to leaders, educational leaders, and I had very strong contacts in the community I was working. And when you have those contacts, you find that people reach out to you. I knew of many people anyway, a great number of people. You can only imagine after 21 years as a principal and even greater number of years in education, there I've
mhm,
built up a lot of contacts, and those people realize that you're going into what you're doing is coaching. And then, well, when I left my role as a principal, I did do a lot of marketing at the time,
mhm,
and I was marketing specifically to leaders, educational leaders, and I had very strong contacts in the community I was working. And when you have those contacts, you find that people reach out to you. I knew of many people anyway, a great number of people. You can only imagine you start taking on one or two clients, and then they might make a recommendation to someone
mhm,
else, and so it slowly progresses that way. I wouldn't say that it's been full on, but that's not what I
mhm,
wanted anyway. It's given me
right.
plenty of time for leisure, plenty of time for R&R, and that's what I wanted after working hard for 21 years and doing the 70, 80 hours a week. So
Mm.
right now, this is about developing credentials and street cred as a coach in the industry of education.
And that's exactly, I think, that's one of the ways you can approach it, right? Because especially if you've been working as hard as you've been working, you don't need to necessarily go 100% into it. You can enjoy and get into it. And honestly, too, like the first few years, you're also kind of figuring out most coaches who are coming into it are still trying to figure out who do I want to work with, who do I want to serve, what does this look like, what kind of style and model do I want? And so um, if you can take the time to breathe and reflect and think through like this is where I want to take my business and my life, that is, I think, very important because if we're just like head down trying to work, which is great, but then you're not necessarily working towards a destination that you actually want to be going to. You're just working.
Yeah, exactly. And I must say that, when you can only imagine 21 years of leadership, it wasn't just a principal. I've sat on boards, still
Mm,
sit on boards, trusts,
mhm,
many other organizations in the
mm,
capacity as a leader, and also you can only imagine in 21 years how much professional development I had around the topic of
Mm,
leadership. It is,
mm,
I am extremely confident about what I what I do,
mm,
and I think again, just drawing on life's experiences, a vast array of reading and professional development, and the many degrees I have is actually gives me, the ability to really approach this with a great deal of confidence. I can't imagine what it would be like to be a 30-year-old waking up and saying, "Oh, I'm going to be a coach." I think that would almost be tantamount to failure.
I think that's interesting because this also came up in the previous conversation that I had, where, depending on who you're working with, if they're like upper level management, like senior vice VP, C-suite level, they're looking for somebody who can understand. Very often, they're looking for somebody who can understand and relate with them, right? And
Mm,
if especially when you're up at those levels, the issues and problems you're facing, not everybody can really understand or deal with. Even if you're dealing with just like the normal, let's call it normal, like personnel issues, but understanding the stress that they're under, or like if they're dealing with some regional issue, or something else happens, it's what they're looking for, somebody who can kind of relate and then also be able to help them to handle and kind of go through those work through those problems and issues, right? And
yeah.
as you're saying, like if you're a 30-year-old with less than a decade of work experience, it's hard for you to connect with these people and relate with them. But also, like when it comes to referrals and your network, it's not necessarily going to be as deep or as valuable as somebody who's been working in a specific industry for 20 plus years and has been building their network and showing that their knowledge is valuable in such a way.
You are almost describing the idea of understanding the empathically how to work with leaders, not just
Hmm.
theoretically. You've
Mm,
been there, you've understood the moments of despair, you've understood how lonely it can be, you've understood the massive challenges.
mm,
How often do we read of failing organizations?
mhm,
And when I read about the what's going on there, the team dynamics, it leaves you incredulous. You ask
mhm,
yourself, how could it be so bad when we understand what management should be today, what building team camaraderie should be? It never
right.
ceases to amaze me that whether it be a major corporation, that there is, whether it be a tyrant sitting at the top or someone that just simply doesn't understand what it means to manage people. So
Mhm,
yes, it's the difference between just understanding the theory and understanding the theory, but lived experience of what it means to be a leader, and to
mhm,
be in those moments of crisis,
mhm,
be in those moments of despair,
mm,
and immense enjoyment and immense privilege as well. It's a whole spectrum of experience and emotion for
yeah,
any leader.
yeah. You bring up a really interesting point in that it's amazing that we have certain issues that come up in organizations when we have more access to information and more books and knowledge about coaching, team dynamics, collaboration, leadership psychology, all of these different things, and yet we still run into the same problems. Why do you think that is?
Well, said earlier, I think the most successful leaders seem to be the most self actualized leaders.
Hmm.
And I think many people, well, I would say the minority, but there are a significant minority of people who don't seem to be self actualized, don't seem to understand themselves in the context of managing others, and the way that they either egotistical or ego driven in what they're doing. There are a number of responses to that one, David, I think. I've just found the people I look at and admire most. are people who not only understand the principles of good leadership, but they've got a really good sense of who they are as people.
Mm.
You
Mhm.
know, they know their limitations. They've got a
Yeah.
sense of humor that they use really well. You know, they understand what it means to build trust. They understand what it means to build. I love the Peloton metaphor, you know, as a cyclist. I
Mhm.
love the idea that you as a leader, you create the Peloton.
Mhm.
You're getting your team to get into the slipstream, but you
Mm.
will share that leadership at times with
Mm.
other people who will come to the front because you respect the fact that they may know a bit more. They may be the
Mhm.
right person at the right time to take the lead, to build collective cohesion, to build that collective sense of well-being and
Right.
trust. That's what seems to be missing in people who are not well self-actualized. They think it's about them. You
Mhm.
only have to look, there are countries in the world, for God's sake, that have leaders like that. I
Mhm.
think we both know who we're talking about.
Yes, yes.
Enough said.
Yeah, yeah. It's a very interesting topic because self-actualization definitely comes into play. Um, and I would say us at this time, we have more time and space to be self-actualized, but yet we seem to have fewer and fewer leaders who are self-actualized. And I think it also comes down to, again, as I'm having conversations, more of these conversations with coaches, something that came up with for them was also like, as a coach, I need to take time to think and reflect about myself and my business. And I think having time to sit and reflect is also something that is very often missing in the world today. What is the thing with Netflix? It's we're competing with sleep. How much
Mm,
time are people spending and watching Netflix versus actually sleeping, right? If we're spending more time consuming content, scrolling through our phone, how much time are we spending on our own self-reflection and introspection? And when we talk about corporations and organizations,
yeah,
if one person can do that, wonderful for that one person. But that's an organization. You need to have the whole organization to consider and think through these things, right?
yeah, yeah,
Not not like everybody in the group, right? But there has to be key people in the leadership that are thinking this through to help guide the organization, right?
yeah, yeah. I agree. And look, leadership itself is a multi-billion-dollar industry,
Hmm.
and yet we keep finding dreadful leaders all over the place. And I think that many of them are just not driven by really good internal value system. They're driven by, and many of them have the dark triad personality types, you know. So
Mm.
it's
What
really
can you explain that dark triad personality types?
a psychopathy,
Hmm.
narcissism, Machiavellianism. You know, I think that there's a tendency for many people to rise to the top because of the quite nefarious ways in which they've done it. And
Hmm.
yeah, I will qualify this by saying that education's an exception because you just have the most magnificent people working in education. They're well meaning and they really, some of them just need support, but I'm yet to meet anyone really who would fit that characteristic of the dark triad. But
Mm.
I have also come across and worked for some pretty awful leaders in education. But
Mm.
yeah, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and why can't it mustn't be working very well if we keep seeing the same kinds of people rise to the top.
Right. I mean, and that's also like something that I'm thinking about more and more these days is one of the coaches I was speaking to again, coach from Atlanta in the US, he was saying we organizations get the leaders that they promote. So if you're choose a leader and you just put them into a position, you're going to get whatever that person is. If you don't provide training on how to become a good leader, because most of the time these people are getting promoted from within. They're subject matter experts. They're very technical, very good at what they do. But when they're
Yes.
placed into that managerial position, they don't necessarily have the skills or the support to be a good leader. And so my thinking right now has kind of come around. How do we? Because most of the time you're bringing in coaching when there is a problem, so coaching is more of a, we need to fix this thing that's broken. How do we to think about coaching as a preventative measure where we premeditate bringing in coaches into the organization so
Mm,
that
mhm.
we're already giving them support from day one as we're moving them up into those roles of leadership?
That's a great question, and I can see that structurally that's happening in Sydney. There are organisations. A colleague and I, for example, have teamed up, and we are embedding coaching into the independent school sector
Yeah.
across Australia. And so there's an awareness, there's a dawning awareness of the importance, as you say, of getting this into place prior to people perhaps stepping into the
Mhm.
leadership position, middle management, call it that. There are some problems, I think, in this country, and I'm sure other countries, and that is understanding the lack of regulation that defines what a coach is.
Mhm.
And not to digress too much, but pretty much anyone can call themselves a coach.
Yeah.
So the industry can be greatly discredited by loopy people or those people who actually have been in a senior role and have automatically called themselves a coach without any training.
Mhm.
Now, they may or may not do a reasonably good job, but they make no distinction between coaching, mentoring, and I think that that's an issue I have is around the lack of credentialing of some people and the
Mhm.
lack of regulation. So it impacts at every level there.
Yeah.
But yeah, just going back to your point, we do need to embed it in the earlier stages, but we need to embed qualified people,
Yeah.
is what I'm saying. Not just a colleague who's a friendly face you can pick up the phone to. That's all very good,
Yeah.
and that's helpful. But if we want to really go beyond that and really nurture the talents that people can so clearly exemplify as a good leader, we
Mm.
perhaps need to embed it earlier.
Yeah. And that's a really good point. Yeah, this is fantastic. I think this is amazing because I'm very excited about this because I think this is really interesting and really necessary because I think if we want to, my sister, she's having like a plumbing issue right now, and when you have a plumbing issue, it's going to cause a lot of problems because it's water's leaking all over the place. If it gets into the foundation, you're going to have to like just tear out the whole thing and just do a whole rebuild, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and that kind of happens with leadership, right? If you put in the wrong leaders, and if you don't handle it as soon as possible, you might end up tearing apart, having to tear apart your whole organization and do a whole rebuild. And so,
Mm,
how do we put into place preventative measures to ensure that the people we put it into place to trust into those leadership roles, how do we make sure that they are being trained and that they are the right people to be in leadership to guide, in these different levels? I think
mm,
that's a
mm.
very interesting place for conversation because if we could do that more often, I think what we were talking about earlier, which is we still have crap leaders at all levels of business and government. Maybe if we were to do this more frequently, we could prevent some of that from ever occurring again. That would be like my deepest prayer, I think, at this time of history.
Yeah, yeah. And conversely, how about coaching those who they don't recognize their own leadership ability?
Mhm.
And there are some fantastic people I've worked with who will be incredible leaders. I can see it.
Mm. Hmm.
But helping them to come to that realization,
Yeah.
I think it works both ways. Like I did work with a deputy principal who was aspiring to be a principal, but through good coaching, he realized he didn't really want to take on that role, that he was a great deputy. We've seen that many times. People who
Yeah.
are an exemplary deputy principal, still a leader,
Hmm.
but knowing their limitations.
Mm.
And I've worked with people who just don't realize they are so good at what they're doing. They are exemplary leaders. They can go far. They need
Right.
also a lot of nurturing. So it
Yeah.
sort of cuts both ways.
Right. Of course. And I think the point here is that if we can do things earlier and kind of help guide and shape
Mm.
these people instead of just kind of letting fate roll the dice with fate and just seeing strong people in a work function and just bringing them up, if we were more intentional with it, what would we have not just in an organization but in the maybe in our culture and society? Maybe we would have better leaders if we actually were more intentional in developing future leaders, right?
And I think that there are some industries who are embracing what you're saying more than others, David. I attended
Mhm.
a conference recently at EY in Sydney, and
Mm.
EY had about 15 coaches in attendance. Now, they may have been human resource managers as well, but they were coaches, qualified coaches.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, some industries, and I would include education here, are very slow to come to the realization that there is great benefit in coaching. I know many organizations open up to EAP access to a psychologist, but it's not a psychologist. More
Mm.
often than not, it's not a psychologist someone needs. It's
Mhm.
probably a coach who's been in that role who can work with them. That
Mhm.
seems to be a better fit.
Mhm.
So, there's a kind of an emergence of a realization around what we are talking about here, but
Yeah.
it's industry specific.
Yeah. I think that's great though. Any forward progress is always going to be great. I am talking with another coach who will be on the show, who was a headmaster in the UK, and he was saying in part of the way that they do their training for headmasters, they bring in mentors and coaches. And well, they started with mentors, and now that's shifting towards coaching for those new headmasters to help them to develop and to gain those skills. So I was like, that's amazing because again, it's an educational institute doing that. Talking about like coaching and bringing in coaching into organizations for yourself as you're moving into this whole coaching industry. Did you have any mentors or other coaches you were working with or who were helping you as you were making your transition into this coaching business?
Yeah, yeah, because if you become accredited, say I am with the International Coaching Federation, you
Hmm.
have mandatory requirements. A lot of that
That's right.
is supervision and peer mentorship. That all has to be logged.
Hmm.
That's ongoing. So there's a lot of that. I spent hours and hours online in talking to other coaches on you know many evenings.
Hmm.
Where we've discussed various issues, client issues. So it's almost built in when you have ICF credentialing.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I think that's very good because when you're speaking with other peers and other people who have been in the industry for a while, you get to learn from them, right? And so better to learn from others than to suffer through the trials and tribulations and learn it through the difficult experience, right?
I also had to have some business peers who could
Hmm.
help me establish myself. I mean, I was going from, if you like, the safety and comfort of a
Mm.
school to creating my own business. So I also needed to have some guidance in that respect. And
Mm.
so there was a dual process going on there, not only maintaining the mentorship and the
Mm.
supervision as a coach, but also trying to learn the ropes of how to run your own business.
Right, because I would imagine going from education to running your own business, there are just facets that are drastically different, right? You don't need to necessarily do marketing uh, or sales, well, depending on what kind of school you're at, right? But it's when you're also doing that by yourself, it's very different than having an organization behind you. How was that for you trying to figure out the business end of coaching?
When I look back now, I see that there were some mistakes I made.
Mm,
The establishment of a business is easy in itself in Australia. You get an Australian business number. The New South Wales government offers a lot of free advice.
mm,
Marketing is always the big one. I spent a lot of unnecessary money in marketing.
mm,
I'm quite upset by how much money I did spend on that.
mm,
And then I found someone, who was promising a lot when it came to building websites and everything. I, again, paid a lot of money for that, and I didn't think the quality was very good at the end. So I've learnt about that.
yeah,
There's a lot of subscriptions you have. There's insurance. There's a lot to it. I wouldn't say it's complicated. And I did
right.
work with marketers at the school, a lot over the years. I've always worked in with my marketing team. So I'm aware of what needs to be done. But
Mm,
I think it brings its own challenges. You
mhm.
learn a little bit, but compared to the responsibility and the stresses of leadership, it's nothing. It's a piece of cake, like you just deal with the tax office and pay
Mhm.
your subscriptions and put in your statements, and that,
Yeah,
that's all procedural. It's really nothing compared to managing people. That
yeah.
managing people, wow, that's where you come home and you have a sleepless night.
Mhm.
I have never had a sleepless night over managing my business.
It's good. Because that means you've probably been running your business properly, and so there's not a lot of concern about that.
I think, as I said, I've made mistakes,
Mhm,
oversubscribed to some aspects, accounting system. A good example is my accounting system. I had the highest level of accounting system, paying a fair bit of money for that. I didn't really need it. I just needed the
mm,
entry level accounting system. So you learn things like that.
yeah,
I just wasn't sure at the beginning what sort of system I would need. But
right.
again, it was pretty minor when all said and done.
Mm,
There's not. I think one has to be realistic. There's not a lot of money to be made in the coaching industry. That's what
mm,
people need to realize. I'm
mm,
more fortunate because I work as a consultant,
mhm.
and as a consultant, you can also, as I mentioned before, you're in a position where you are coaching, and therefore you're able to make a little bit. But there's not a lot of money in coaching, David.
Well, I think that also depends because again, I've spoken and I've been in the industry for 10 plus years. So I do know, depending on like where your niche is, who you're serving, you can't, there are people who are making quite well, like six figures plus, but it depends on the way they set up their organization and their business.
Yeah.
And generally, they're also building their own personal brand. And also, if they figure out a way to do like group coaching, and they'll have either a group of other coaches that work with them, or they have set up an organization with a few other people that work under them to deliver on the coaching as well, and to make it very lucrative. But it also takes time to figure out what's going to work best, and a lot of it is also you have to build that brand, that business coaching brand, to a level that is seen at the upper levels of like the Fortune 500s, the MNCs that are looking for coaching at that level.
Yeah, and I think you have a much better understanding of that. I can hear straight away than what I do, you see. So, I mean, you've
Mm,
probably got some insights there which really interesting from my perspective.
Hmm.
I haven't pursued a lot of those avenues intentionally,
Hmm.
but I don't for one moment doubt what you're saying. You've got a pretty good grip on it. I I've often wondered whether it's built on a multi-layered marketing sort of platform. It's a bit like a pyramid. There are some
Hmm.
people doing particularly well. I'm not sure. I spoke to someone the other day who was saying, "Oh, I might want to be a coach." Coming in at the bottom level, he's probably going to be scrambling around there for quite some time on a good
Yeah.
luck trying to buy food sort of thing.
Yeah. I unfortunately, what's kind of coming out, at least from my initial conversations right now, is the first 2 years you're really figuring it out. If you kind of figure out your service proposition and your value proposition, then your next 3 to 5 years or 3 to 10 years, you're really just ramping up and growing. But if you haven't done it by after the second year, I think by between 3 to 5, you've probably burned out and you've left because you can't figure out how to build the business.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Because I haven't been able to, I'm still looking for people who are really successful 5 to 10 years in. 10 plus, 10 plus is you're established and you've figured it out and you just keep making you're just working with people, helping them and able to make a good amount of money because you're delivering on your coaching, right? But getting to that space of understanding how to deliver, how to, create visibility for yourself and build your brand, um, that takes a special muscle, right? Where you're really pushing that entrepreneur mindset, building up your business and personal brand to be able to now go out and say, hey, my name is Phil Roberts. I've done this with XYZ. I've done this 100 times and I've delivered on all 100 times or 95% of that time with this result. And when
Yeah,
you're able to do that with such confidence and to show, the work that you put in, the testimonials, the lives changed, then you at a certain point you can just start naming your price because you have your proven track record, you have your system down, and if you can go to a person and say, if you spend, you know, this amount of time with me over the next year, you're going to get this much better. For a leader whose time is money, they're going to be like, okay, if I can spend 20 hours with you over the next year and I can get 5 times better to 10 times better, if I'm paying you $50,000, $100,000, that's well worth it because they're making way more than that. And so I think but that again, it takes the time and the muscle to be able to kind of see that and to push forward in those ways. Because not everybody, that's not what everybody's looking for. Because that takes a lot of time and a lot of work. Um,
yeah.
so I think it's really like as a coach, where do you want to be in 5, 10 years? Do you want to spend a lot of time building your business and building your personal brand so that you can be doing that, or are you comfortable where you are? You're paying the bills, you're taking care of your family, and you're helping people at the level you want to help them at, and that's much easier. uh, it's just much easier path for business, right? But if you want to go up to working with the C suites, it just takes more time, more effort.
I don't disagree with you at all. I think you've got a much better grasp of this idea of how one can explore different avenues to get there than I have.
Mm,
That's why many of the coaches are actually using people in that
mm,
way to try and. I remember when I first started out, there was a guy who had a P. He had an online seminar for aspiring coaches, and his story was fascinating. He was doing well, but he said the first 2 years he actually left his job, and the first 2 years he was making no money.
mm,
And so it was it was a kind of an interesting story and a salutary lesson as well that we have to be working cleverly in ways to build what we're doing and to build
Mm,
our brand recognition. Yeah.
yeah. It's not easy and it's not for everyone. And I think, yeah, it takes a lot of time and self-reflection on where do I want to be? What's the business that I want to have? Because again, it takes a lot of time and effort if you want to be working or making a certain amount of money. If what you want to be doing is more local or working with schools or different levels, then it's an easier path to to be able to do that.
I, I,
Um,
I as I said, I do agree with you. I think I come back to I'm fortunate that I'm leveraging off a lot of history, contacts. If I was young coming into this, I
mhm,
think what you have said is so much more pertinent
mm.
and relevant.
It's an interesting conversation to have, and I think coaches really need to think about that as they're developing their businesses. Where do I want to be, and how do I develop that? Um, can I ask you what has been one of the most rewarding parts of running your own business for you these days?
Having flexibility.
Hmm.
I think it's, again, I was in the office when I was a principal every morning at 6:30 a.m.
Mm,
Uh, I had a long week, and here I am doing most of my work online, and just having the flexibility to choose the time, the way in which I want to work. It's
mm,
something I haven't experienced before. It's fabulous. I mean, I was never in a position where I could say, "Hey, I'll be a principal this. I'm going to be home one day a week. I'll see you on Zoom, guys." It just doesn't happen. You can't do that. So, having this flexibility, and I'm interested in how it works. That's the other thing. Like I'm
mm,
really curious generally. I'm really interested in how it all comes together, how you
mm,
build up your own brand recognition. You know, I'm I've developed some skepticism around some social media platforms. And yet I'm not unaware of some effectiveness there, but I don't know. I've just really enjoyed learning. I'm happiest
mm,
when I'm learning. And if I'm learning about how to build my brand and how to build what I'm doing,
mm.
I'm happy. That's what to answer your question, that's what I've really enjoyed about it.
That's great. I think, I mean, someone with an education background, you're probably a lifelong learner, right? You always just want to keep learning and absorbing, and I think that's a wonderful part of that. If you think about your experience from your time in education and until now, and as especially this part of your life in your coaching journey, what is one piece of advice or wisdom that you would want to provide to people who are considering getting into coaching?
I would say don't I would want people not to rush into that decision unless they've draw able to draw on some experience. I think there's a difference between having knowledge and having wisdom.
Hmm.
And I think that at the stage of life I'm at, I'm very fortunate to be able to draw on a lot of experience.
Mm,
And that has made this so much more enjoyable from my perspective. It's not that I doubt myself, as I said before.
mm,
Uh, I I've been around long enough, and I've done what I've done
mhm,
in many different capacities, and I have a very good understanding of what this is all about. So
mhm,
the advice might be just bide your time.
mhm,
Don't rush into being a 20 something coming out unless you've got something to draw on, some
mm,
experience there. It's um, now I know I'm leaning more towards, perhaps by saying this, I might be sounding more like a mentor, but I think
mm,
it's life experience I'm talking about. I'm not talking about industry specific experience, even though in my case that's important. It's also life experience, drawing on some of that, what it has meant to have experienced life to its fullest.
Mm,
And I have done just so much. I've been so fortunate.
mm.
That's what I draw on.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Um, Thank you so much for your time today. I've had a lot of fun, and I feel like we've broached some very interesting conversation topics about coaching and leadership and where we can improve in terms of leadership for the future. Um, Thank you so much for being here on the podcast, and I've really appreciated your time and this opportunity just to get you to know you better.
Well, my sincere thanks to you, David. It's really enjoyable, and thank you so much for giving me that opportunity to come onto the podcast. I hope that there are people out there who really benefit from what they're hearing here. I'm sure that'll be the case. Thank you.
Thank you so much.